For Pacifica Radio, I'm Christina Onnested. Israel's opened a key border crossing into northern Gaza and disciplined 5 military officers, including dismissing 2 of them, after President Joe Biden spoke with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu Thursday and said future U.S. support for the war in Gaza depends on Israel doing more to protect civilians and aid workers. In the wake of an Israeli strike that killed 7 World Central Kitchen aid workers in Gaza this week, Biden also called for a ceasefire to stabilize and improve the humanitarian situation and protect innocent civilians in Gaza, and called on Netanyahu to push negotiators to conclude a hostage deal with Hamas. According to a statement from the White House, Netanyahu has called Hamas's demands for a hostage ceasefire deal delusional. Secretary of State Antony Blinken welcomed the changes earlier today. Here's a couple of excerpts of what he said.
These are positive developments, but the real test is results. It's also critical that we see an independent, thorough, and fully publicized investigation into the killing of the World Central Kitchen. Israel's obligation, its responsibility to maximize protection for civilians, to make that a priority, that too is a critical test.
The United Nations says much of the population in northern Gaza is on the brink of starvation. Gaza officials say the Palestinian death toll has now surpassed 33,000, with another 75,600 people wounded. The United Nations Human Rights Council passed a resolution today calling for Israel to be held accountable for possible war crimes and crimes against humanity committed in the Gaza Strip. Israel accused the United Nations body of abandoning its people and its hostages. Some 100 remain in Hamas captivity. During his conversation with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, President Joe Biden reiterated U.S. support for Israel in the face of threats from Iran. Iran's commander of the Revolutionary Guard threatened to punish Israel today, calling it a Zionist regime and escalating threats of retaliation for an airstrike that killed 7 of the group's members, including 2 Iranian generals earlier this week. The strike, attributed to Israel, destroyed the consular section at Iran's embassy in Syria. It was condemned by world leaders at the United Nations. The tensions raised renewed concerns of a widening regional conflict. Here in the U.S., opposition to the war in Gaza has spurred conversations about tax resistance. As a filing tax deadline nears this month, Christopher Martinez reports.
Webinar on genocide and tax resistance was sponsored by the National Lawyers Guild as part of its legal support for movement activists. Suad Abdelaziz is vice president of the Guild. She says U.S. officials have been concealing arms deals to Israel, including more than 100 in the past month, while they publicly decry the deaths of civilians in Gaza.
Globally, activists are launching campaigns around no tax for genocide.
War tax resistance, refusing to pay some or all federal taxes because of an objection to war or to a particular war, does have a long tradition in this country. Famously, Henry David Thoreau went to jail for his war tax protest against the war with Mexico, and then wrote the book Civil Disobedience that influenced Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King. But the history goes back farther than that, according to Rice.
It goes back to the 17th century when an Algonquin tribe refused to pay taxes for a Dutch fort.
The activists discussed what they call myths about war tax resistance, such as fears that resistors will go to jail. In fact, they say that hasn't really happened for the last 25 or 30 years. Although there are special concerns for people in immigration proceedings, green card holders, and non-citizen spouses. I'm Christopher Martinez.
President Joe Biden visits Baltimore today to get a first-hand look at efforts to clear away the hulking remains of the collapsed Francis Scott Key Bridge. Cranes, ships, and diving crews are working to reopen one of the nation's main shipping lanes. Biden was planning to meet with relatives of the 6 immigrants killed in the collapse. 4 of the presumed dead are still believed to be trapped under bridge debris in the river below. Maryland Governor Wes Moore Thursday says it's a dangerous mission, and they've put divers in teams as efforts continue.
That water is so murky that salvage divers cannot see any more than 1 to 2 feet in front of them. As you remember from yesterday, the collapse of the bridge is so distinct and so severe, with the metal that is so disconfigured and so brought together and pancaked that it continues to make this mission extraordinarily complicated and dangerous for those who are conducting it.
The cleanup and rebuild also has high economic and political stakes. The government has provided quick release funds to start recovery. The White House is calling on Congress to approve all that will be needed without seeking a separate emergency appropriations request. And the House Freedom Caucus responded such funding would have to come with conditions. I'm Christina Onnested reporting for Pacifica Radio.